It's about the issue of whether there's a conflict between spirituality and science. Why did I want to do this? Because I'm teaching in Japan with a lot of Japanese students, Asian students from China, and I've started teaching bioethics. It's now a number of years I'm doing it. And if you were here in the morning, you could also notice some kind of mood that do we need ethics? And if we need them, even if we want them, can we actually have them? And a lot of it comes from, you can say, changes in modernity. A lot of our kids now do not have a lot of trust in religion. They don't think spirituality means a lot for their future or for how they live, and they think they should just follow what others do. So my explanation for them is that we need values, and bioethics is a study of these values and how they relate to science, technology, and other knowledge we gain in university education. So there is a very common and growing, unfortunately, misunderstanding that a belief in religion and God is contrary to science. So I'm trying to open up this. First, this is the first answer I give my students. Remember that no matter what happens in Japan or in China, 84% of the world population in a survey they did in 2010 were reported to identify with a religion. It's the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life. Unfortunately, confusing the area of applying science with that of religion is very common. In Middle Ages, religious leaders intervened in science. Now we have some scientists intervening in religious and spiritual values. This is one example, like Steven Weinberg, who is a very well-known theorist of physics, has said science doesn't make it impossible to believe in God, it just makes it possible to not believe in God. I'm going to study this, make a critic on this statement. So what is the limitation of science? Its limitation is in methodology. It's a naturalistic methodology. Ethics a lot of time uses philosophical approach. A philosophical approach also has limitations to especially logic. So something impossible would be impossible if logic says it's impossible. So we have to remember these limits, the limits of each, and do not try to apply one in the other area. So a scientist who comes to this conclusion that the universe is pointless, and a religious practitioner who avoids medical treatment, both are wrong because they're applying these in the wrong area. Spiritual health, Daniel told me that it's actually in the statement of WHO. I checked it. The general statement on health doesn't include spiritual health, it includes social health. Spiritual health has been mentioned in regional statements, mostly Mediterranean region statements. But anyway, spiritual health is a fact. It refers to the human sense of having found a meaning and purpose in life, of inner peace, and interconnectedness and mindfulness. So I have references for them at the end of the presentation. You will see some of these references. And most people, not all of course, most people rely on religious beliefs to attain spiritual health. And this is probably the most significant contribution of religion to human health, especially at an individual level. So I'm going to give you some examples of areas that science methodology, will give us very unexpected conclusions. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the Big Bang Theory as the origin of the universe, and the Darwin's theory of evolution. I'm a scientist. I'm going to do this as a scientific methodology. Okay, so the Big Bang theory is now the most widely accepted theory about the origin of the universe. You know, during the time of Einstein, it was believed that the universe has always existed. Now, they are quite sure, of course, science never is 100%, that the universe originated from a singularity at 13.798 plus minus. You see, this is the Planck collaboration study, 2014, billion years ago. So it started from a singularity. And Hawking says there is no way to scientifically investigate anything before the Big Bang. And whatever we know about science, physics, actually even at the point of singularity, it has to be something else. Because I'm in Japan, let me follow with the slides, but I will show you some kanji, some characters, some Chinese characters that show this problem in the origin of universe. So let's look at this, and let's look at the Darwin's theory of evolution and try to study them scientifically. When it comes to Darwin's theory, we as a scientist, we believe that life evolves but is never generated. It only evolves. And in the last 3.5 billion years, life has never been generated. It has only evolved. So the question of where the first form of life came actually doesn't have a very good answer. Genetic studies show the minimum number, the smallest number of the most simple form of life would be, there are a number of studies, Glass et al., they have published a number of papers. It would be the minimum 240. Each of these genes have hundreds to thousands of sequences. And you can remember the entropy principle, so how they could come together randomly to generate life. This is the idea that, you know, they came randomly. They come randomly together. And then what I want to do is to use scientific methodology to study this question. So what I'm saying, as you see here, scientifically proving God does not require faith. It requires familiarity with scientific methodology. So we form a hypothesis, we test that hypothesis, we are going to set a measure for our hypothesis testing, and we are going to make a conclusion based on that. So first we come up with a null hypothesis. That's the scientific method. So here we use the null hypothesis of there is no God. So only if we can reject this, then we accept the hypothesis, the alternate hypothesis of God exists. So we need in science a working definition for everything. So what do you mean by God? So in this examination, I define God first as the creator of first life form, second the creator of universe. We have to set an error rate. Let me give you an example of what an error rate is. All of you believe that climate change is happening. The IPCC says that it is 95% certain that human activities, not random changes in climate, are causing, this warming. This is a little more than the previous assessment in 2007, which was 90%, and 66% in 2002. So this is about a normal distribution, which looks at all probabilities, and we are going to accept a hypothesis, also accepting there is a risk that we may be wrong in doing that, or better to say, we may be wrong in rejecting the null hypothesis while it is correct. And in most scientific studies, it has been set at 5%. In some medical studies, they set it at 1%. So this is the basic. You can divide it by the number of sigmas. So I'm going to set my error rate not at 5%, not at 1%. I'm going to put it at the level of 7 sigma. They use 6 sigma for improvement of management. So if my error rate is set as 7 sigma, this is the number that I accept. Would be the chance I will be wrong in rejecting the null hypothesis. So let's go back to our studies. Our two examples. One was the random generation of life. One was the random generation of universe. The random generation of life, actually, the possibility that it could happen is next to 0. And there are a lot of ways to try to measure that, but let's start with the fact that it has never happened again in the last 3.5 billion years on Earth. And according to our theory, it actually shouldn't happen. And if you look at the possibility of those 240 genes to actually come together to make life possible with entropy that is next to 0. And then second, so we just realized we are talking about the possibility of something that randomly it would be very, very, very highly unlikely to happen. And it's not about 5%, it's not about 1%, it's about a very, very small number, and still it is very unlikely. So science is never 100%, but when we consider an error rate, we can say how much it is likely to happen. The next example was creation of universe. These are the 3 characters I want to look at, So this means nothing, this means just space, and this means something that exists. So the idea, some scientists who think that science can be used to disprove God, they have talked, even there was a book published, how something can come up can result from nothing. The nothing that he meant was this, and we know space is not nothing. The actual nothing is this, and we are asking about something that physics says is impossible. Energy and matter cannot be generated out of nothing, they only change to one another. So again, we have a 0 impossibility, and we can easily reject that null hypothesis. So I just used scientific methodology to show you how scientific methodology works. I'm not telling you you have to base your faith in God or disbelief in God based on this. I'm just showing you how science works and how you could, because so many people think that when we say science is only direct observation. No, it's not only direct observation. Direct observation applies to some scientific findings, a lot of other, actually all the thesis of students in this university that I screened many of them are based on exactly this process, setting a null hypothesis and trying to see whether it can be rejected at a certain error rate and the alternate hypothesis automatically being accepted. So I'm just showing you how science works. Now let's look at cause of trying to misuse science to disprove God. They should not do this. They are different areas, but let's look at this. Japan is one of the most secular countries in the world. If you have been to Japan recently, you know maybe that they may be Buddhists. In surveys, 40% say they are Buddhist, 60% say they do not identify themselves with any religion. But even those who say they are Buddhists, they do not practice Buddhism. So even the idea of religion in Japan is very different from what you expect in other countries. It's very much mixed with cultural and societal and social identity. So Japan has one of the highest suicide rates, a lot of spiritual health problems, although because of a strong social network, ethics, social ethics is very powerful. Socially, they are very healthy. Crime rate is relatively very low. You really have to worry about somebody, doing any crime in Japan. Comparatively very low rate. At the same time, superstitious beliefs are very common in Japan. Very, very common. Although secularity is strong, but superstitious beliefs. This is one of the things that is interesting, why such a thing is happening. These are the rates of suicide. You see, Korea now is at the top. Japan is here, and there are a couple of other countries that are in the middle, but Japan and Korea in Asia have very high suicide rates. Finally, I want to say, if you want scientists to have values such as humility, the more we learn, we actually realize there is a lot more to learn, and that kind of humility is a value that a scientist, a top scientist, can hardly get from just focusing on what he can do with his science. The other thing is compassion, a very important value in any kind of scientist, medical scientist and environmental scientist and so on. The last thing I want to say, I'm also teaching psychology. And one of the things I teach, and I'm not, I have no claims, so I use only textbooks of psychology. And in those textbooks, I have to ask a student to compare human intelligence with machine intelligence. And usually at the end of the lecture, after we have a long debate, we come to this conclusion that what you see in movies like Terminator, is hardly ever going to happen. Why? Because you cannot program an intrinsic desire for growth, reproduction, and so on, which are characteristics of life, into a machine. A machine would not simply have it, would not feed it. But at the same time, while I was teaching it, nobody has ever asked me, what can I tell my student about the plant kingdom? The plants do not even have a nervous system, but they are programmed into growing, into reproduction, and into supporting the animal life kingdom. I still cannot explain. I hope I can get some comments from you. I'm not trying to use anthropomorphism, but I'm trying to ask this question, simple question. How a plant does something that we cannot program into a machine to do, while it's the basis of life. There has been, this issue of generation of life is such a big one. I think you may have heard even there are some cults who think that there was some alien who came and planted life and lived. And they say maybe the alien life was something that could happen randomly, but even for scientists who do not believe in God, there should be an alien, mind behind what we have here, and we don't appreciate that much. So these are, all just my thoughts to kind of motivate my students to think a little more deeply. Don't think if they have a gadget, they have overcome everything. We talk about sustainability. I have a question, usually I ask my students, this is my last comment. Would you like to live in the past, in the future, or in now? After I have told them from all the disasters that are happening and are going to continue to happen, most of them want to live in the future because they think this technology, as you can say, as a symbol of technology, is worth it. So you have, if you are educating young people, I think that's a very, very important, you can say, task to help them value life more than this. So thank you. If you have any question, comments, thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Do I have 5 minutes?
Thank you very much for the nice presentation with the scientific illustration. If you give me just 1 or 2 minutes, I'll just come to the blackboard and then just say, since I am a scientist as well as a religious worker, I can just do something.
Okay, I agree.
Okay, do something good.
So, one side we take science, and the other side we take religion or spirituality. Okay, what is the ultimate aim of science? It is to reach the truth. And religion and spirituality also, the ultimate aim is to find the truth. To find the truth through science, you do observations. But here, it's by faith, and not faith, blind faith, but it is through your value system, and the experiences or the miracles you obtain in your life, you enjoy in your life. So maybe it's a combination of miracles and your association with your neighbors. So association with our neighbors. So all these virtues take us towards the truth. So a religious person can as well be a scientist. So those two go parallel. So a scientist can also be a religious person because both religion is to find the truth and a scientist also works to find the truth. Thank you.
Okay, other. Okay, go over.
Two parallel lines never
Wait a
meet.
moment. Please wait a moment.
Okay, say.
Two parallel lines never meet.
Is that a scientific statement?
Two parallel lines never meet, and if you are an evolutionist, you have to deny God.
Why?
And life does not, Nader has said it is evolve or generate. What's the difference between evolving and generate? And life comes from life itself, never comes from non-materials. And DNA has information never comes from non-materials. And so you cannot, you cannot mix light and darkness. So if you are an evolutionist, you have to deny God.
My answer would be that as somebody who has studied science, I believe in evolution, and I don't think it has anything to do with my belief in spirituality, in God, and in higher existence. Recently, Pope Francis made a very interesting, metaphor that you don't have to think of God as a magician using a magic wand to do things like, the way that why shouldn't God do something, that is following reason, is following a process that is based on wisdom? Why should we think things should be. This is a way humans think. So, and I think this is a very interesting perception. So I would never try to, because as a scientist, I have to follow and respect my colleagues who work in science. I cannot say, this is what I cannot believe, and this is the kind of science I can believe. I am one of them, but I don't think they should have this kind of thinking that because they have discovered these scientific facts, they can disprove something that is not in their area. That I just hope they can understand the lines. As you say, two parallels, I like that very much. But I'm very happy, I respect your idea too.
Okay, Professor Lee, Irina, and Tim.
Okay.
He's got a mic.
Yeah, this is a big and deep questions about the struggle between science and religion or spirituality. Now, I would like to make a point from a philosophical standpoint. Philosophically speaking, we will say the two realms, science and religion, are talking about different realms of experience or human experience. Okay, don't mix it up. It would be a kind of observation or scientists saying and judgment about spirituality. They are fit for that. But on the other hand, I think religious people have to be aware that what you're talking about may not be true to the scientific facts. So we make two things different. And I think human being is very complicated, and we have very different sorts of experience. Okay, so let us give respect to other peoples, and especially the way of life. I think that's a bit of bound between the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good comment. I fully agree with you. No.
Okay, Irina, next.
So can we move the mic? Yeah, to.
I find that there is the split between science and spirituality is artificial. As scientists, we can't know everything, and when we're doing work with statistics, like you were mentioning in your talk, going towards some sort of a truth of understanding, we can only look at what we already understand. It's like in a computer, we put in the facts and then the computer gives us some sort of result, which may or may not be exactly what is happening. And spirituality, I'm a scientist, but I feel spirituality is part of science because it evolves. We know that spirituality has evolved from unicellular organisms to multicellular and right up to ourselves in the human. So it is part of evolution as well, but in a different sort of area. And the separation is unhealthy and causes problems. Even in plants, you said plants don't have a nervous system, yet they can face the sun and they can do lots of things. It's a different nervous system.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Okay, Tim, next, please.
Okay.
When I look at the situation of science versus religions like that, the brother back there mentioned about, if you believe in evolution, then you automatically have to disbelieve in God. The problem is the definition of evolution, because when you use these same words that often have a very different meaning. I could say I believe in evolution if I mean change over time. But if by evolution you mean, as your definition, that it must be by materialistic, physical means only, and there's no, by definition, you're eliminating any kind of anything, any beyond nature of any kind. That's already in your definition, and you say, therefore, evolution proves that there is no God. It's a circular argument, because you're trying to prove what you've already assumed, or that's a circular argument, and so you really have to get back to what do you mean by these words that you're using. But otherwise, you just argue in circles. You get nowhere.
Yeah, thank you. Like, what I didn't emphasize enough was, I want you to focus on defects, insufficiencies in the methods we use, even when we use science as a methodology. Like when I teach research methodology to my graduate students, and when I tell them, you set an error rate, and if it is a little above that, you cannot reject the null hypothesis. And so scientists have come together and agreed, if it is less than 5%, accept it. If a lot of them are arbitrary. And even some statisticians, they are not very happy with the way scientific methodology works. Forming the null hypothesis automatically when you can, reject it, accepting. But this is how science works. And I was trying to show that if you just use this methodology, you can prove something that many people think that science could never prove. So, that was just a demonstration. I just wanted to say that, we have to be clear. We shouldn't blur the lines. We shouldn't try to think that if we are scientists, spirituality, everything goes out of the window. That was my main point. And I was trying to say that students need to feel that. That was all in education. Thank you so much. So,
last question from
Yes.
Justin.
So it's not a question, it's a comment on that when we create a theory and then we are faced with conflicting facts, we struggle to either to accommodate that or reconcile it or change the theory. My only critique of your talk is that it's a generalization based on one civilization's worldview. What you're basically talking is the struggle in Abrahamic traditions and modern Western philosophies to come to terms with idea there may be or may not be God and that sort of thing, when now it's been faced by the facts of science. These conflicts don't actually exist in all civilizations, so we should not generalize. In many Indian traditions, this conflict does not arise. In my own tradition, the very structure of the Golden Temple, the water around the Golden Temple is a reminder to us of the theory of evolution. So we were already an evolutionist before Darwin came on the scene. Darwin may have been a novelty for most of the West. It's not a novelty to us. The idea of universe is coming from nothing and going to nothing is also nothing new to us. So I would just ask you to temper your talk and say, this is a struggle that you are dealing with, is a conflict that Abrahamic traditions and modern Western philosophies and thinking is facing with scientific evidence. It's not something that exists in some other civilizations.
Thank you very much. In fact, I didn't want. I mainly focus on spirituality. I don't want to really. I just wanted to think of this issue that exists among our young generation. Let me give you one example. I have a lot of students who are interested in science and especially astronomy, and they bring you this news. We have discovered a planet which is almost the size of Earth. So life should exist there. We have discovered a planet that there is water, so life exists everywhere. This is all against the theory of evolution. Life is never generated. So if life exists anywhere, it has to be evolved from here. Generation of life is so difficult. You cannot say, we found a planet this size, then the life should be there. We found water, life should be there. We have water, we have this planet, we have everything we have here. Life has only been generated in 3.8 billion years, only once. So why every other planet which is moving next to us, it should have life? So my question is, why students have this double standard, why they are so much intrigued by science, why they simply forget so much more basic things they could have learned in science, like life is never generated, it only evolves. You see, so thank you very much, but my point was not going to philosophy, it's just focusing on how my students think about spiritual issues, because to tell you the truth, the situation is pretty bad, very, very bad.